Most people think they already know what Adam Smith meant when he wrote about the invisible hand. They picture it as a quiet but powerful force that guides the economy toward balance and fairness. They imagine an almost natural law that ensures markets will sort themselves out, correct themselves, and ultimately benefit society without needing much interference. The phrase has become so popular, so endlessly repeated, that it almost feels like common sense. To understand why this matters, imagine discovering that the foundation of modern economic thinking, everything from free market theory to deregulation arguments to political ideology, rests on a single line in a 2-volume, 1,000-page book, and that line was never meant to carry so much weight. Imagine realizing that one of the world's most influential ideas is widely misunderstood, and that this misunderstanding changed the direction of nations, affected the distribution of wealth, and shaped the dynamics of power in ways that Smith never supported. Tonight, we explore the real meaning of Adam Smith's invisible hand, not as a slogan or a political tool but as he wrote it. And the further we go back into the world Smith lived in, its politics, its monopolies, its financial structures, the clearer it becomes that the modern interpretation of his words does not match his intent. The story begins long before economists simplified his work, long before his ideas were rebranded in the 20th century. It begins in an age of empire, mercantilism, and rigid hierarchies, where the economy was anything but free. In the early 1700s, Europe was dominated by mercantilist policies, a system where governments controlled markets, restricted trade, and protected powerful corporations with exclusive privileges. The East India Company, the South Sea Company, and the Hudson's Bay Company were not ordinary businesses. They were effectively arms of the state. They had the power to wage war, claim territories, draft treaties, and monopolize entire industries. Trade routes were granted by royal charter. Imports and exports were tightly regulated. Prices of essential goods were influenced by guilds and political alliances. Ordinary merchants could not freely enter markets dominated by these colossal institutions. Competition was stifled by design, and entire populations were shaped by decisions made in distant boardrooms. This was the world Adam Smith observed, an economy structured around privilege, not freedom. Smith was not first and foremost an economist. He was a moral philosopher, concerned with human behavior, ethics, and social well-being. Before he ever wrote The Wealth of Nations, he published the theory of moral sentiments, arguing that humans are guided not only by self-interest, but also by empathy and concern for others. His goal was never to glorify selfishness, but to understand how people make decisions and how societies maintain stability. This foundation is essential because modern interpretations often depict Smith as someone who believed individuals always act out of narrow self-interest, and that this is enough to maintain a healthy economy. But Smith believed that self-interest, without moral grounding or competitive balance, could easily turn harmful. In fact, he warned repeatedly that business owners, if left unchecked, would collude against the public, manipulate markets, and influence laws to their advantage. By the time Smith began writing The Wealth of Nations, Europe was changing. Industrialization was emerging, global trade routes were expanding, and small-scale merchants and manufacturers were challenging the dominance of monopolies. Smith saw the potential benefits of markets when competition was allowed to flourish. He supported the idea that people should have the freedom to trade, work, and innovate without unnecessary restrictions. But within this advocacy for competitive markets, he was careful, measured, and deeply aware of the dangers of concentrated economic power. The invisible hand appears only once in this massive work, and even there, it is not presented as a universal principle. It is a metaphor used to describe an unintended outcome. Some merchants, due to personal preference and lower perceived risk, choose to invest domestically rather than abroad, and by doing so, they unintentionally support local economic growth. Their goal is not national prosperity, it is simply security. The invisible hand represents the unplanned social benefit that emerges from this behavior. This is crucial. Smith was not saying that all selfish actions benefit society. He was not saying markets naturally self-correct. He was not arguing for the complete absence of government. He was simply observing that in this specific context, a private decision led to a positive public outcome. In dozens of other sections, Smith explains how self-interest can harm society, how markets can fail, and how the powerful can distort economic systems. If Smith believed the invisible hand ensured good outcomes, there would be no reason for him to dedicate so much of his writing to warnings, critiques, and concerns about the misuse of economic power. The modern misinterpretation of the invisible hand emerged gradually. In the 19th century, economists began simplifying Smith's ideas. In the 20th century, particularly through the Chicago School of Economics, the phrase was elevated into a guiding principle, the belief that markets are efficient, self-correcting, and naturally beneficial when left alone. This rebranding came during a period of ideological conflict, globalization, and shifting political landscapes. Leaders wanted a theory that justified deregulation, privatization, and reduced government intervention. The invisible hand became the perfect symbol, compact, persuasive, and seemingly rooted in classical economics. But this was a selective reading, one that emphasized a single metaphor while overlooking Smith's larger framework. The effects of this reinterpretation shaped decades of policy. Deregulation in the financial sector, justified by faith in market self-correction, played a central role in the build-up to the 2008 financial crisis. Smith warned that industries would attempt to shape rules in their favor. The crisis reflected this exact behavior. Banks took increasing risks, confident that market pressures or internal incentives would keep things stable. When the system faltered, the fallout was global. Millions lost jobs, homes, and savings. The idea that markets would naturally police themselves proved false in ways Smith predicted. Beyond finance, the rise of corporate concentration challenges the assumptions behind the invisible hand myth. In technology, retail, pharmaceuticals, and energy, a small number of companies dominate global markets. Their scale allows them to influence policy, suppress competition, and control supply chains. These are not the competitive markets Smith admired. They resemble the monopolistic structures he criticized. Modern data shows that, in many industries, the top 5 firms control more than 80% of the market share. In some sectors, a single company holds a dominant position globally. These conditions reduce innovation, depress wages, and limit options for consumers. All outcomes, Smith believed, were harmful. Income inequality presents another parallel to Smith's concerns. Over the past 4 decades, productivity has risen significantly, but wage growth for most workers has remained relatively stagnant. Meanwhile, the wealth of the top percentiles has grown exponentially. This disconnect reflects an imbalance in bargaining power. Smith argued that employers often have advantages over workers and warned that wages would not rise fairly unless competition among employers existed. Today, in many regions, workers have fewer options, lower mobility, and limited influence, conditions that weaken the mechanisms Smith believed necessary for equitable outcomes. Attempts to fix these issues have often been incomplete or misdirected. Some reforms rely heavily on market-based solutions, assuming that incentives alone will reshape behavior. Others focus on increasing efficiency rather than addressing structural imbalances. Smith believed in efficiency, but he also believed in fairness, justice, and broad prosperity. His vision for markets required strong institutions, transparency, and safeguards against exploitation. Many modern reforms fail because they do not address the underlying power dynamics, instead treating symptoms rather than causes. Despite these challenges, understanding Smith's actual message offers clarity. He saw markets as powerful tools for growth, but fragile when dominated by concentrated interests. He believed individuals should be free to pursue their goals, but only within a system that protects the public from abuses of power. He recognized the potential for unintended benefits to arise from private actions, but he never assumed those benefits were guaranteed. His philosophy was balanced, measured, and rooted in observation, not idealism. Today, we can see patterns repeating. Economic shocks expose structural weaknesses. Market concentration reduces competition. Misinformation about Smith's ideas leads to policies that conflict with his values. And yet, the original message remains relevant. Markets work best when they are competitive, transparent, and guided by principles that ensure fairness. Smith did not oppose government involvement. He supported interventions that protected society, ensured justice, and maintained balance. His invisible hand metaphor was not a law of nature but a reminder that human behavior can produce unexpected outcomes, sometimes beneficial, sometimes harmful. The real question is not what Smith meant in one metaphor but what he believed overall. He believed economies are human systems, shaped by choices, incentives, and institutions. He believed no single force guarantees good outcomes, and he believed societies must be intentional in shaping their economic structures. The invisible hand was never the foundation of his theory. Morality, competition, and institutional design were. From this story, three key insights emerge. First, the invisible hand is not a universal principle but a specific metaphor describing an unintended benefit in a narrow context. Second, markets are powerful but require rules, oversight, and protections to remain fair and competitive. Without safeguards, concentration and exploitation become inevitable. Third, many modern economic challenges from financial crises to inequality to corporate dominance stem not from Smith's ideas but from misunderstandings of them. His warnings remain relevant because they address the persistent realities of power, incentives, and human behavior. And so the story leaves us with an open thought. If one of the most influential ideas in modern economics can be misunderstood for centuries, Smith encouraged careful observation, critical thinking, and a willingness to question established narratives. Perhaps the greatest tribute to his legacy is not to repeat his words, but to understand them. If you found this exploration helpful and want more deep dives into the ideas, thinkers, and forces that shaped our world, consider subscribing, liking the video, and sharing it with others who appreciate thoughtful, well-researched content. Your support helps continue these long-form educational stories.